I do this with class. Okay, hey, now we're recording. Yes. When I have my students in class, and granted they're teenagers or budding teenagers, one of the things that I like to do when they come back to me, even if it is like a Monday to Tuesday scenario, I say, well, let's talk about what we did last week or yesterday, right? Because I think repetition actually becomes a really great form of learning, not so that it become ritualized, but when we do some recall, it actually helps us pull in that information and kind of like ruminate some more on it. So what did we talk about last week? What are the things that pop up in your mind in terms of the things that you are remembering from last week? Yeah, that was our big question, right? What is religion? And then I asked you to define it, and then we came up with a bunch of adjectives, and we had like 3 pages of adjectives, right? And what was the conclusion from that project? Right?
What,
That,
We're all bringing concepts that are more specific to our particular religion rather than
yes.
the bigger cultural picture.
Yes, and that was the big takeaway, right? And that simultaneously, from a pastoral perspective, we are also potentially in a position where our wounds, our traumas, those things that we have felt like we've moved beyond, those things kind of came out a little bit in those adjectives. And in that they came up, it means that this course, if done well, should just kind of shake some of those wounds a little bit, not so that they bust open. Hopefully they won't bust open and you're bleeding all over the place and we have to call in the paramedics, the spiritual paramedics, but that you can sort of just kind of look at them. Okay, so when they come to the surface, I keep pulling up the exact same document. So when these wounds come up, when you start to feel that tug, that I don't want to be talking about this anymore, or that knee-jerk reaction to anger, remember that those emotions are often masking a bigger, more profound one called fear, sadness, regret. You know, we want to always be bodily present with where we are with our feelings, okay? And I'm happy to hold space for any of that. And as we go along, if you feel comfortable that this space becomes something that's open for you to talk about something that you're wrestling with, I would love that. But I'm also available off course as well. What's another thing that we tried to define religion? We talked about how some of those adjectives were coming up from our own experience and wounding. And then what else did we talk about? Do you remember
Friedrich Nietzsche we talked about.
Yes, we did talk about Nietzsche. And what was, John Mark, can you share one thing that you remember from that discussion?
I don't remember the exact quote, but I also remember that we talked about like his exploration of the death of God after that.
Yeah.
And how religion was something very serious to Nietzsche, even though people often view him as like a nihilist.
Yeah.
He was a much more serious and found a lot more value in life than a nihilist.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. I really enjoy reading him. One of my favorite things to do is to get sort of a little bit more orthodox Nietzsche scholars. And I like to say, I think Nietzsche was a feminist. And they get so mad because they're like, no, he's not. And I'm like, wait a second, I have a way around it. I won't get into that now because this isn't a philosophy class, but it's super fun to mess around with people who are like really strict about their reading of Nietzsche. But he's very passionate. He actually mourns his loss of faith. He's not one of those classic, like angry atheists, which is I'm not being mean, that's an actual category of atheists that is a little bit has run its course. I think a lot of people now that identify with atheism aren't necessarily full boat in the angry camp. We're talking about Hitchens and who else? Who else am I thinking of in the angry atheist camp?
Richard Dawkins.
Dawkins, yeah.
Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett. I would put Lawrence Krauss on there.
Yeah, so the angry atheists are really dismissive of just about anything religion. And oftentimes the trauma, when you hear their backstory, it's, I was told that the Bible was true, and then I found this error in the biblical text, and then I lost my faith, which actually is very traumatic, especially if you have been raised in a tradition that is very much this is, without any ability to question. But oftentimes it's reactive. Anyway, what else did we look at from last week? That's pretty good. I mean, seriously, we talked about the course, we talked about what the structure's like, we talked about how it's more dialogue, and that you guys kind of direct me in my teaching. So, okay, so what we're gonna do tonight is we're gonna look at two different things, and we're going to look at a text, which I will share a screen. But I think first, what we need to do, I think we really need to watch a Simpsons clip, right? Okay, so if you give me a second, I'm gonna go ahead to my teaching outline, and I'm gonna pull up a really serious Simpsons clip about religion. I'm laughing already. I can't even keep a straight face. All right, hold on a second. Come back to me. You should see how many Word documents I have open. It's absolutely terrifying. All right, hold on. I'm gonna pull it up, and I have to control click. Okay. Pull it up. What if I copied it? Okay, here we go. Now I'm gonna pop over here to my internets. I'm gonna use this open screen. You like how I'm telling you all my moves? If you guys were here, you'd all be laughing. Okay, hold on. This is great. Okay, hold on. All right. Okay, so here's a question for you, Daniel. Yeah. If I share it from my computer, I'll need to turn on the sound, right? Or do you want me just to send you the link and then maybe you play it? Okay, share it. Should I mute? Okay, all right. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We figured it out. This is technological savvy on the fly, everyone. This is grade A technological work. Okay. Do I need to have full screen do I need to have my Zoom full screen to share full screen? Okay, good. Okay. This is not only what is religion class, but what is Zoom class? All right. Okay, hold on. Okay.
Lauren, we can't hear it.
Actually, she can't hear us either because this is her screen.
Oh, that's right. We could chat.
That's what you did.
Okay. Zoom is muted.
Speakers are muted.
It says Lauren Larkin muted.
Your sound.
I don't know where it's coming from.
We may not be able to do it.
What if everyone else muted?
Yeah, I don't know if that's
Okay. Can we play it?
I wonder if the mic that you have on, Lauren, and your computer is just like reverberating off of each other.
Okay. Okay. All right, that should be better, at least from my end. Okay. Thank you for your patience. So what I like to do is incorporate interesting, comical media into my classroom environment because I find that, should I talk and hold my tiny little mic? I like to get people laughing. Usually that's a nice way of breaking down any kind of like day end rigidness or discomfort in being in a group of people. And also too, if we can't laugh at this subject, we're never going to be able to talk about it at Thanksgiving. And my goal, we end right before Thanksgiving, my goal is to have a good group of people ready for Thanksgiving table and say, let's talk about religion. It's an aggressive goal, I know, but it's amazing what some good, solid, intellectual engagement, wrestling with some laughter can do for breaking down boundaries to actually talking about things that matter, which is religion and politics. And oddly, the two intersect, even though a lot of people in America like to say they don't, which makes me laugh and laugh and laugh. And then I take a breath and then I laugh some more.
You're cut off. They can't hear you now. Oh, shoot.
Are you worried about the dog barking?
No, I'm not worried about the dogs barking. So stressful.
Don't press play because you'll hear me move the camera.
What?
You'll need to move the camera because they're looking at me.
No, they're not.
They're not?
I'm sharing my screen.
Oh,
I don't know if they'll hear this. Can they hear it?
No,
No.
still can't hear it.
Okay. I can't. I don't. Can we just move on, probably?
Well, I can always describe it.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. All right. So in this clip.
Hold on, you're not mics. Hold on. This is really stressful. Hold on.
All right. Okay. So didn't work, but we can still laugh at the number of mistakes that we have made in the past 5 minutes. Yay. Okay. So Homer is bringing religion to a group of people that are obviously people who live on an island and are being depicted as, you know, what I would imagine that our classic impression of indigenous peoples would look like on islands that haven't been impacted by the West, right? And so what I like about what Matt Groening did with this is, that's the artist, is it's sort of, the clip highlights a bunch of our preconceptions, the things that we assume we know about other people that aren't us. And that Homer says, holding the Christian Bible, because the Jewish Bible, which is also a Bible, says Tanakh on it. So Homer holds up a book, it says Holy Bible, and he's bringing religion. What is he actually bringing? Christianity. He's bringing Christianity, but it gets classified as this big, like Christianity is the religion, and this religion is about God, right? And so when we find ourselves talking about our own faith system, we probably have a long and deep history with the idea that we have the most evolved one, which we did talk about last week. Darwin's theory of evolution did impact how religion was investigated. Okay, and so so when was Darwin writing? I believe 1700s to 1800s? Who knows those dates more than I do? Charles Darwin. John Mark, you talk.
Yeah, it was. So it looks like somebody said yes.
Okay, yeah. So once at the same time, we have the encounter of Europe getting in boats. Remember I did the thing where I got in my boat and I was like, and I went across the ocean, and then I encountered something like Buddhism and its sophistication and its elaboration and its intellectual capacities, and it's, beyond anything that the West had preconceived before. And so all of a sudden the confrontation between Western Christianity, specifically Europe, more specifically kind of German, theology gets impacted. Protestant theology, Christian theology is impacted by another tradition that is fully functional, but not their own. All right, and in that moment, there's a crisis. And so as Darwin is writing and publishing on, we know that he's publishing because the Gutenberg printing press comes out in like the 1500s, and that's what helps Martin Luther propagate all of his texts super fast. So anyway, we know that they're being printed. The academics are reading them. Darwin's theory of evolution, which is applied to humanity and the world, gets applied to religious systems. In that, the less sophisticated the people group look and behave, the less monotheistic their divine, their entity, the absence of heaven and hell, the no mediator, the silence on the discussion of sin, okay, that religion tends to get relegated to a less evolved form. And I have read theories where some people believe that as you go through the religions, you can see a clear evolutionary process by which, as you go up the ramp towards more sophisticated conceptions of gods and then into God, then you have a more evolved form. So over here you have your witch doctors, your witchcraft, your tribal units, your pagans, your heathens, your godless, okay? That's at the bottom. And as evolution manifests itself in the religious sense, people move into polytheism, versions of that, and then they move into maybe a less specific form of polytheism, and then they eventually moved into monotheism, and the ultimate most evolved form of religion is Christianity. And that is kind of behind that little part that you saw where Homer lifted up the Bible in a circle of people, is that, and the language that he uses, I'm bringing you religion, and it's about God. I'm just God's messenger. Those are some big claims. Now in 2021, we wouldn't make those claims. All right, we know a lot about other traditions, and we live with people who practice other traditions. So without being able to laugh, we can jump into talking about perspectives and dimensions of religion, because it's a worthwhile discussion. And so one of the first things that we want to talk about is our pre-understanding. What does pre-understanding mean?
Is it the idea that what you understand before you delve deeper into something?
Yeah, pretty much.
What you bring to the table is what I would say.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so Marty said the baggage that you carry with you too. Absolutely. Anything else? You are way less lively on Zoom. I'm just going to throw that out there. Pre-understanding is a state of one's understanding of reality in terms of which one makes sense of one's new experiences. Okay, so when we go back to that not analogy, but the imagery of Western Christians getting in a boat and going across, the sea, I'm looking at my people, okay, going across the sea, then encountering something like Buddhism and its sophistication and its establishedness, they have to fit it into a pre-understanding of the world that is very filtered through a microcosm of their own existence, okay? It might be the same as, I'm gonna use Tiffany because Tiffany's one of my good friends. She's kind of in the inner circle, but like, let's say if I was back in Louisiana and I was walking down the road and I saw Tiffany and Tiffany looked at me and then kept walking. I would filter that through, we're good friends, I bet she didn't see me, right? Because I have a history, I have a background. Okay, now, who else am I gonna pick on? I'm gonna pick on Linda Sue Ebright. That's what it says on her iPad. Okay, so maybe I've known Linda for about 10 months. I could be walking down the road and I feel like Linda looks at me and then looks away. I might get a little worried. I mean, Linda comes to my church. Maybe she didn't like my last sermon. I mean, what if I'm not leading well enough? Linda's on vestry. Oh my gosh, there's so many things that could be wrong now. Do you see how the context, the background so informs how we tend to latch on intellectually to certain things? We will fill in the gaps. Our brains fill in the gaps. There's a wonderful image online, and it's, the title makes me laugh, but it's "Your Life is a Lie." Now, for all of us existentialists, that is chuckle-worthy because we've already dealt with that kind of stuff. But the neuroscientists behind the image will have you look at an image that is distorted in color. It'll be a house with trees. Let me know if you've seen it. You can raise a hand. But it's like an image with house and trees and grass and sky, but the sky is orange and like you see it differently and you stare at this image, and then the neuroscientist says, keep staring at the image, keep staring at the images, drops all the color tones, and it's black and white, and guess what you see? Blue sky, green tree, green grass, yellow house. But there are no colors there anymore. Your brain fills in the gaps. What you think is true actually could be demonstrated as at least non-existent, not false, but potentially not the way things are. I think we touched briefly last week on maybe Hinduism and Hinduism's understanding of ultimate reality. And I mentioned that there was a tree out the window, and there is now, and I can see it. For some reason, it's lighter out tonight. Did we start earlier? Is the sun doing weird tricks? Is it spring all of a sudden? So there's a tree out there, and I see it, and I can describe it to you. I'm like, it's got some dark green leaves, it's got some lighter green leaves, its bark is coarse, right? But you may look at it and have a different understanding of what green means. Maybe the green that I'm seeing is kind of a more of a Kelly green, or the green that you would imagine Ireland is covered with. But your green is a little bit more yellow. Okay, there is a tree though that exists beyond our perceptions that is itself, in its essence, its perfect form. And we will never see it there. Okay? It's kind of, that's usually one of the moments, at least with the teenagers, they go, we need a second. Everything that exists around us exists in its own right, in its own reality, and that's a reality we can't access, especially when only one of us is talking about it, which is always my go-to argument when we're talking about God, because we need so many people talking about God to even begin to get close to maybe even describing it remotely rightly. And yes, I'm using horrible language right now that is completely like subjunctive tense and definitely in the passive voice, because that's, in my opinion, the only right way to actually talk about God, is throwing out a bunch of words and hoping they kind of make sense. Some of them stick, some of them don't. Another fun example of pre-understanding would be the existence of Santa Claus. Why would I mention the existence of Santa Claus, or at least the idea of Santa Claus, as being a part of a pre-understanding? Yeah, it's part of our Western culture. I'm moving to Russia. Oh, Father Winter, yeah. The Germans have, who am I thinking of? Krampus. Yes, the mean Santa that will come and put you in a sack. Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so we're talking in here about Eric has mentioned the variety of ideas that aren't necessarily Santa, or even the absence completely of the idea of Santa. But when we talk about Santa, we have, as a children, how many of us were raised with the imagery of Santa? How long did some of you believe it?
I was in first grade and my girlfriend told me Santa Claus wasn't real.
Did you break up?
No, I told my mom and she just told me not to tell the other kids. I learned, I think I was in first grade. I'm trying to think of like the basement of the house that we were in and thinking, yeah, that's right about first grade. And I'm not a really strong religious person, but I have a strong sense of like abstract spirituality. Like there's something beyond this dimension for sure. I'm certain of it. That kind of thing. It's kind of really interesting. But I really enjoyed the idea of Santa, like this mystical being that like could show up and bring me presents. And granted, it was dependent on my behavior, but at the time it sounded wonderful. But my brother, who was 4.5 years older than me, he decided one day to lure me downstairs with Lauren, get down here or else. And he's big, so I was like, on my way, sir. Came running down, and he opened up the laundry room door and he was like, there are all your presents. And I was like, like just the blinders were peeled back and my whole entire little world like crumbled to the ground. And then I started challenging everything, Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, like staying up late to make sure that I was sussing everything out. But anyway, we have these pre-understandings. We are sometimes given them and sometimes we have them ourselves, but Santa is a pre-understanding. And when we get further information that's presented to us, it will challenge our pre-understandings, okay? And so when my brother flung open the door, that was a moment for me to either deny reality, because there was a bunch of things that were definitely on my Christmas list, or to embrace that and say, wow, life is cruel. I'm now an existentialist philosopher, which is probably the whole root of everything. But you have that moment, and we still are having our Santas kind of pulled back from us, right? And so Santa Claus, my kids, we don't do Santa in my house, but my kids all at one point for about a period of 6 months have been the strongest Santa evangelists I have ever met. And it's because they will meet someone who will convince them that Santa is real, and they come home and they will say, Mom and Dad, Santa's real, and this is why I think so. And it's really neat to see them argue, and we kind of enjoyed it. But then they figure it out like about a year later. So it's short-lived, but so Santa is one of those things that's kind of like a pre-understanding. When we encounter new knowledge, our pre-understanding grows. So what's interesting about pre-understanding is that you're never getting to a point where you're without it. You're always making conclusions about the world based off of your collection. I almost threw us all over into the waters. We're always making conclusions based off of the data that we have collected. Has anyone ever heard of the author Bessel van der Kolk? And the understanding of the body keeps the score in terms of like memory of emotions and feelings? Okay, it is, if you're into something that would potentially really walk you through some profound bodied experience in terms of addressing yourself as an emotional being, as an intellectual being, I recommend Bessel van der Kolk. And I believe I'm saying his name right, but it's a fantastic book. But we acquire, he came up because I was talking about emotions, but we have, okay, what I wanted to say in regards to that was, we have an ability to not jump, that was a leading word. We have the ability to come to conclusions about a situation, like my situation with Tiffany, walking down the road. I was able to conclude, you know, I could have been wrong. Maybe Tiffany was mad at me actually and couldn't stand the side of me and just kept on walking. But I would have an encounter where I would have an emotive reaction as well. Everything's fine. With Linda, I expressed that I was a little bit more anxious because what if Linda didn't like the last sermon or doesn't think that I'm doing things good enough over here? And so I would start filling in with this emotive thing. Yes, thank you. 1 second, let me get this thought out. I would start thinking this one thing. Now, when I talked to Linda and said, you know, casually, coffee hour after church, hey, Linda, how are you? And then she started talking to me and then expressed that she had just dropped, you know, a whole flat of soda on the ground before coming and was just really frustrated and stuff like that when she was on that sidewalk. Then that would give me information that would then alter my emotional status. Okay? When we acquire more information, it can help us go from angry to fine, or from sad to content. All right? Because we will get, you know, we will be nervous, we will be scared when our brains are frantically trying to fill in the gaps. Okay, and we do the same thing with pre-understanding. Our pre-understanding grows because we're always making those conclusions. The scary thing is when we decide it's done growing and I don't need to learn anything else. I know exactly everything. Now, what's interesting is I've been reading on, I'm still reading about the Weimar Republic, and I'm deep into the late 1920s and 30s, and I'm reading about Hitler. One of Hitler's characteristics was he thought he knew everything. He taught himself, he would read books, and he would say that teachers are for other people. They're superfluous for me. I don't need any. He didn't like educators, teachers, intellectuals. But see, what happens is that's part of that. In my vestry group, we're talking about narcissism, but that is part. I know everything. I'm the authority on it. I don't need anyone else's assistance. Okay, so Marty. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? So that could be another thing. So filling in the gap that Linda just wasn't looking for me on, you know, this sidewalk downtown. I belong in church. That's, what do you, with teachers, yeah. Yeah, so Marty brought up that there's always a context to something else, and maybe it's based off of the fact where you know someone the most, right? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do right now. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. So I'm trying to rephrase the statement so everyone can hear it. So Marty said that being out of context, me, who's church person, I supposedly should live, sleep, eat, and breathe here, right? Not really, but when you see me on the street, you're not looking for that because you're looking for Lauren that wears the collar and the robe and the stole and the cincture, which is fancy for long rope. Right? But when you see me walking around like this, I just look like a regular human being, and so your pre-understanding of what Lauren could look like wouldn't register. It would have to be redefined. So that's a good example of what's going on there. So any questions before I move on to the next section of the outline?
I have one.
Yes.
Pre-understanding seems very much a double-sided thing to me. So like on one side, we can definitely bring in, say, continued progressive understanding of different topics and situations, scenarios. I think about Martin Buber's I and Thou, for example, as a good example of trying to see the other and want to experience or understand the experience of the other. But I feel like there's definitely maybe a dark side that could go into pre-understanding, as far as we could definitely bring that kind of trauma and view our lens not through a progressive lens, but a harmful lens or a traumatic lens or a painful lens.
Yes, we bring so much to that understanding of pre-understanding, or our engagement of our pre-understanding isn't just intellectual, which is why it's really, if you have the time to pick up something to read. That Besser Vanderkolk book actually helps you to understand just how connected we are, body, mind, and soul. We're not dualists. We are one person and everything's working together. You can't just intellectually decide everything, because how many times, you guys haven't been, but I have been wrong when I have assumed I have connected all the dots and that is clearly a Pegasus in the sky, and someone taps me on the shoulder and says, no, 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 baby, that's Orion. No, 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 that is Pegasus for me. But you know what I'm saying? Like, we make those, that's why when we read in the Gospels that Jesus says, do not judge, get the plank out of your own eye before you mess around with the speck in your own, it's because you don't really know the scenarios operating behind that person's life. Okay, Daniel and I have talked about, I'm looking at Daniel, he's over there. Daniel and I have often talked about how we like to use criteria by which we judge someone good or bad. That criteria is actually based off of a lot of pre-understanding, because let's say you come up to me and you say, so I get up at 4 in the morning. And let's say someone comes up to me and says, I got up at noon. It is potentially possible that I could judge and say, well, aren't you a slug of bed? That's a word that came from my professor at Davidson, the English professor. He would call everyone late to class a slug of bed. And he had a Southern accent, so that ed was real long. It was as long as it took you to walk to your desk. But I could judge someone as lazy. But what if noon was actually early for that person? What if noon marked a new day where that person said, I'm going to try to get out of the house today because I have been so depressed I haven't been able to leave. We don't wear our stories on our sleeves, right? There are shirts you can buy that have literature written on them, but we don't wear our stories as outfits. How many of us who have birthed children, so I'm speaking to the moms in the room, and then I'll address the dads. How many of us moms at the end of the day in a store with a couple of kids have kind of gotten a little snappy at them? Okay. All right. So have you ever gotten a rude look from someone walking down the aisle like, well, aren't you a woman? Yeah? Okay. Okay. Dad's in the room. Dad's in the room taking the kids to the store. End of the day, you get a little snappy. Well, aren't you so great? You're doing such a great job. It's okay, you snapped, it's all right. You're babysitting, right? Like, there's a whole, meanwhile, mom is an ER surgeon, right? And she has lost one of her patients and is trying desperately to get dinner home with the kids and everyone in one piece so she can go pour herself a glass of wine, get in the tub and weep. But based off of just the material data points, we say, well, you're being snappy with your kids, so you're obviously not a good mom. David Foster Wallace is actually really profound in talking about this stuff. If you want to read a really deep thinker who sadly took his own life, but he is profoundly good talking about this relationship with other people in the world, and we just don't know what they're going through. And when we keep that in mind, we become remarkably more pastoral in our daily lives. Checks that knee-jerk reaction. Any other questions? Statements? Yes, Marty. Okay. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what Marty was sharing about her granddaughter who has autism is that it's not so much that the granddaughter is changing as much as it is her perspective is changing about the situation, and that's impacting even more, right? Yeah, and so that's what's really neat is I remember right before I left Ascension Church, I had someone come up to me and say, and I'm sharing this story because it really kind of hammers home, I think, what you're saying. I had a guy come up and say, Reverend Larkin, I understood everything you said today. And I was like, oh. And he realized, and I said to myself, I think she's finally figured it out. I think she's finally talking down to our level. And I was like, no. And he went, and then I realized, nope, I understand what she's saying because I've been exposed enough. It's that moment where it's not just that everyone changes around you, you are actually in the process of changing. And as you change, things become new normals. New language becomes regular. You understand all that crazy jargon. You understand all that crazy stuff. It's why school, when we enter into it as adults, is always very intimidating. But if you just give yourself enough time, your experiences will be filtered into that pre-understanding and it will all make sense. I entered seminary, I was just maybe 2 years a Christian. And someone behind me mentioned the book of Jude. And I was like, that is not a Bible book. That is a song by the Beatles. And then it was real, right? I didn't know, I had no idea. But like I eventually learned. When I talk to students, I tell students, when you're reading something new, don't try to understand it, just keep reading. Get that author's language in your head and you will figure out what they're saying because you'll pick up on the terminology. All right, so I have been yammering on plenty, so I want to give a break. So before we go to maybe like a 5-minute break, can I ask if there's any more questions?
I'd like to make a comment on Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens was a beautiful human being who was angry. I often call him St. Christopher Hitchens because I believe he really did God's work as far as exposing a lot of toxic attributes of especially popular Protestantism today. And a really quick story about him is he was asked if he could get rid of all religion, would he do it? He said no, and I don't know why. And so I think something about him definitely appreciated the beauty and the wrestling of existence. Compared to any what I would call the new atheists, this is the movement that you're talking about earlier. Christopher Hitchens did incredible work in combating a lot of toxic things I think that we find in theology and religion today.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we kind of touched on last week was just that idea that when we are standing in the building, we really can't evaluate the foundation. We need the people who are outside the building who can tell us that our foundation isn't gonna hold for much longer. And it's people like maybe the younger Christopher Hitchens or even our more friendly atheists who like Friedrich Nietzsche or Karl Marx or Sigmund Freud, right? Sigmund. Am I getting my Germans all right? Am I mixing them up? It's possible. But we need those people to be critiquing so that we have an idea that something's fracturing underneath us. So John Mark, thank you so much for saying that. And that's a great way to take a little 3 to 5 minute break. As I told my students, I'll just start talking. Your loss if you miss it, but they didn't really care. You guys might care though.
Gather around, everyone. I'm going to teach you about religion. Please, that's not necessary. I'm just God.
Okay, we'll watch it at the break. Okay. Compromise. Okay. Okay. Do we need to get it on the prayer list? Okay. Let me do it for you. Can you? Would you name? Okay. All right. Yeah. everyone would run away, shut down everything. Like all of a sudden, everyone's gone. All right. I'm going to wait until Brian and Susan turn on their screen, just because that's usually, hey! And then I'm gonna wait for Tiffany to pop back into her screen. So Daniel figured out how to show us the Simpsons episode. It's just a minute long, but it should give us a chuckle. But just wait. Yeah, I know you're still here, Cynthia and Ralph. I got you. Yeah. But though you guys could have been gone. Maybe at the bar, wherever you are. I wouldn't even know, nor would I judge if it was real. Anyone want to talk about anything while we're waiting for Tiffany to show up? Is it? Oh, I'm sorry.
The reading you sent out was interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I love reading it from the perspective of a devout Muslim.
I'll be reading it tomorrow morning, as I realized it was sent out 2 days ago, and I'll check 2 days before from now on.
You'll have to tell us who the author is. I'm not familiar with that author.
Yeah, and he's actually well regarded because he shows up in a world religions text that I have on Islam. And so he's really well regarded. He's a really interesting author too. He's a fun read, in my opinion. And there's no grades, there's no assignments really, because I'm going to address all the portions of the text. So if you are someone who likes to read the full text on your own, I recommend reading the whole thing, but you will get a gist for it if you don't want to do that. Oh yeah, hi Tiffany. All right. Slug a bid. Yeah, go ahead and play it.
Gather around, everyone. I'm going to teach you about religion. Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God, oh, God, please, oh, God, please, that's not necessary. I'm just God's messenger. And lo, what a wondrous message it is. Like this, from the book of Psalms. God will shatter the heads of his enemies, the hairy crown of those who walk in their guilty ways, that you may bathe your feet in blood. As true today as it was when it was written. Now, let's open it up to some Q&A. Yes, Lisa Jr.?
Amy said there are lots of religions. Which is the right one?
Well, not the Unitarians. If that's the one true faith, I'll eat my hat.
If the Lord is all-powerful, why does he care whether we worship him or not? Just saying.
Well, it's because God is powerful, but also insecure, like Barbra Streisand before James Brolin. Oh, he's been a rock.
Okay, so I get a chuckle out of it. It's probably a little bit, was sacrilegious the right word? But it's a little bit slightly off color, but it highlights so many interesting things. Did you see what he called the young girl who asked a question?
Lisa Jr.
Lisa Jr. Right? Like, I just love those embedded moments in The Simpsons or in other media that's trying to talk about religion, because if you're really paying attention, and as an observer, I'm always watching for like that picture that moves in the background of all, like that thing that's like, it was there, and then in the next frame, it's not there. I'm the one who notices that. But anyway, these little things are really interesting because it's all commentary. Even something as seemingly simple as The Simpsons, okay, it's a commentary. And so when we see things, don't take for granted that when he looks at the little girl who's not his daughter and calls her Lisa Jr., there's a commentary going on of the tendency of, Western humans to want to come in and just start defining things, right? We would call that colonization. We would call that white privilege now, right? Or maybe even dominant group privilege, okay? Defining from the top down rather than the bottom up. Rather than saying, what's your name? He says, ask your question, Lisa Jr. It's interesting. Anyway, any comments about that little Simpsons clip, aside from the fact that
The not the Unitarians was the best part. because the last church I went to often was a semi-Unitarian church. And for those who don't know what a Unitarian church is basically multiple people from different religious pathways meet in a singular space. And we kind of come together under the human existence, right? We have this understanding. But there could be atheists there could be Muslims there could be Christians there could be Jewish people there. And basically we understand that respect and understanding that our community is not so singular.
Right.
And so that everyone but not the Unitarians is funny because it kind of gives way to pluralism or a multicultural understanding of religion.
Right. Yeah. That is really interesting. That is good. That's a good comment. All right. So jumping back to the moving from that, jumping back to being uncomfortable, one of the things that we need to do with our pre-understanding is be willing to look at things from a perspective of questions. And so what kind of view do I have about religion? We started that last week. We're already addressing some of those pre-understandings that we have, because being able to call a thing what it is fundamental to being able to navigate around it and with it. Okay. I have referenced this example in the past, but John Bunyan's Pilgrim Progress is not my favorite text from seminary. It was so boring, but there is a great image with Apollyon, who's sort of the Dark Knight and is after Christian, who's on a journey in Christ. And throughout, Apollyon always sort of shows up and kind of threatens Christian. And so Christian has tried to do various things, ignore, fight back, but each time it's just devastation for Christian. He can't do it. And the only way that he can actually defeat Apollyon is by to look Apollyon in the eye and say, I see you. Okay, we are not strong if we are trying to la our way through life and like strong arm it, fighting through. We're actually the strongest when we admit where our weaknesses are and then work with them. All right, and I believe that Christianity is one of the many traditions that does give us tools to do that. Okay, so being raised in a Christian environment, I have sought to understand how Christianity can give us those tools. And that for me is asking questions. And another question that I like to ask is, can I suspend my belief or disbelief in a religion in order to encounter it objectively? This for me was most profound when I taught Islam in the deep South Louisiana. It was the most profound 7 days that I ever had in any semester I ever taught, because I had to ask my 16-year-olds to suspend everything that they had been taught about Islam coming out of 9/11, because they're 9/11 babies. All right, they were raised in a world that is strictly coming through, and I had to do creative things to get them to suspend those things, because I couldn't teach them if they were going to hold all those things and shut down and just come out every so often and tell me something that some news station had said or something their parents had said, but with little information. So one of the things that we need to do as mature adults in a safe environment, which is why I really press that safety aspect, is say, can I suspend? It's almost like stripping down some of those protective layers intellectually and spiritually. Can you be willing to learn about another tradition and allow it to speak for itself? Allowing Lisa Jr. to say, I'm not Lisa Jr., okay, right? And so, and I think that with this crowd in general, I think that probably most of you are already willing to suspend a lot of that stuff. Can I encounter practices that are unfamiliar to me without getting too upset? Again, remember we talked about that cage being rattled. That's going to happen. If you get too upset, you can let me know and we can move on. Okay, if that does happen, you can be honest and say, I need this conversation to move on. We take a break and then we reconvene and we move on to something else. I'm flexible that way. But acknowledge that something made you upset, okay? Can I be provisional in my conclusions? We don't like to be provisional. We love to jump to conclusions and decide what something is, top-down analysis. Rather, we need to sort of hold steady, hold the course, and be patient that the thing that we're looking at will reveal itself to me. So hopefully in future events, if we are engaging with a specific religion, we would get to the end of the 6 to 7 weeks and then make conclusions about it. Okay? This is the pitch. This is a big whole 7-week pitch for future classes. And then the last one is, can I postpone judgment about a religion till I learn more about it? Those last two questions are kind of the same, but conclusions and judgments are a little bit different. Like you can conclude certain things prior to it revealing itself, and a judgment could be yay, nay, right? So those are the questions. And then when you go into examining what religions are so that they can speak to you, we want to ask 7 basic questions, okay? And we kind of did this last week when we looked at what is religion and tried to define it. We always want to look at, well, what is the numinous in each tradition? Numinous is a bigger word that you probably don't use in everyday language that could score you a good amount of points in Scrabble if you learned it, but it just is a fancy way of saying the numinous in Christianity would be God the Father of Jesus Christ, okay? Like the numinous would be God the Holy Spirit. The numinous would be God the Son, all right? Using traditional Trinitarian language, the numinous for Christianity would be all 3 of those things, all right? In Islam, it would be Allah, okay? So the numinous would be that the thing behind the thing, the metaphysical sort of thing behind the thing, all right? And it's going to change as you get down into other traditions, to the point where maybe there isn't one. For instance, when you address Confucianism. Though I like to have fun and think that their understanding of ancestry is actually sort of a numinous kind of concept, because the ancestors move along with you and help you and support you, all right? Another question that we want to ask is, what is a person's relationship to the numinous? Do they have one? Is it a distant? Is it personal? Is it engaged? Or is it just kind of non-existent whatsoever? You have a posture, Marty, that looks like rebuttal/question. Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah, but the saints are part of the celestial realm for Catholics. And the saints are part of, maybe the noumenal realm. So numinous is, so Marty was asking a question based off of my comments about Confucianism and the realm of the ancestors and the role that it plays in the tradition of Confucian existence, okay? And then related that to, isn't that what we do with the saints on some level? And yes, because it's that thing that's outside of, but I would say that because we do have a very clearly defined numinous, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, God the Creator, God the Redeemer, God the Reconciler, okay? That is our numinous. And then there's a numinous realm where the saints participate in. The numinous is a bit more non-corporeal, but then that gets me into trouble. Watch me spin my wheels. That gets me into trouble because Jesus was, come on, tell me, fully human and fully divine. Woo, woo. Yes, that's a great idea. We won't do tic-tac-toe. I like flair. I don't know if you're going to be able to read this so narrow. Numinous. Oh, that's right. That's not, hold on, guys. Hold on. I'm coming. I'm coming. Oh, he did? All right, but I'm already over here. And now they can't see it? Okay. Numinous. Here, I'll leave it here, and then you guys can see it. Okay, so numinous is a nice word because what does it allow me to do? Good job. So what Eric said is that it allows me to speak to a core aspect of their belief or tradition without necessarily declaring it divine, divinity, God, right? I can actually allow myself to speak of the concept of what I would call the Trinity, okay? Or that we would say in Judaism is Yahweh, okay? Or in Hinduism, like I almost said pantheon, but that's Greek mythology, but the realm of gods that can, in Islam, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So without me saying, oh, Confucians, your God are your source of ancestors, I can say the numinous, which is a little bit better way of not assuming that I can declare something in another tradition to be something that it might not be, okay? And so then we want to talk about the relationship. So how do human beings relate to this thing that we're calling the numinous? For us, we relate to God through
Experience. Yeah.
yes, experience, but mostly predominantly one of the classic core concepts is we have faith. Christianity presents itself significantly as a tradition that really depends heavily on the orthodoxy of thought, the rightness of thought. And we're one of the ones that loves the H word. John Mark, do you know what the H word is? Does anyone know what the H word is?
Is it hell?
No, we do love that one too. Oh, we do like holy. That's good. Well, why not? Yeah, we got the opposite. Heretic. Remember the bone burning?
Oh, I feel the heretic part. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, anyone who's an existentialist theologian has probably already dealt with the fact that they've been called a heretic once or twice, or just twice. But yeah, like it's that word because we're so dependent on faith. And so our relationship with the numinous of Christianity is built upon this concept of faith, which makes Christianity actually really difficult to kind of hammer down into the material sometimes, because it's personal. That's where we get that individualistic side of Christianity that can get overblown and very violent. But anyway, all right, another question would be, where do evil and suffering come from? So every tradition really does try to answer, why is there pain in the world? Okay, we get our answer from Genesis 3. And it's a profound story, actually, about the fall and how this incorporated pain and suffering and fracturedness of relationships and why humans aren't living along well with the world and creation, etc. Okay, but every tradition actually does talk about, why do we hurt sometimes? Okay, and there's always a unique answer. All right, what is the purpose of life and creation or the natural world in each tradition? And again, every tradition will talk about the person's purpose. What is the origin of the cosmos? Even silence, which Buddhism gives us, even silence is an answer. You guys know that, right? Yeah, we can hypothesize because Buddhism is birthed out of Hinduism. Siddhartha Gautama is definitely a Hindu who turned into Buddhist based off of experiences with potentially numinal figures. But nonetheless, Buddha, who's Siddhartha, Buddha decides speculation is pointless and says worrying about the metaphysical, the being, the way that the world came into being is pointless. You're here, deal with it. That's sort of like a little bit more practical, a little bit shorthanded definition of a lot of complicated material of Buddhism, which when I get an opportunity to teach on Buddhism, I'd be happy to slow down and go through. This is plug number 3. Okay, What happens to people in the afterlife? This is a great question. And again, silence is an answer. Not every tradition talks about an afterlife. Okay? Not every tradition talks about an afterlife. And then how does the religion in question create a social order? And it happens. Every religion actually functions very prominently in society and politics. And it has a lot, it can sway, I don't know if you know this, it can sway elections. I'm only getting that from Weimar in the early 1920s, but those churches had a lot of power in terms of who was getting voted in and who wasn't. So I'm not talking contextually at all. Yeah, and now Eric is bringing it up. It's really about today. He's saying, Reverend Larkin, it's actually about today. Oh. Yeah. He did. So Marty has brought up the fact that Jesus challenged both the synagogue and the rulers and the temple authorities as well as the state. You know who follows closely in his tracks and does not benefit from a resurrection 3 days later? Paul. Paul is hunted by both religious and state authorities. Yep, and he will claim, I'm a Roman citizen, when the Pharisees and the Sadducees are really throwing down robes. Like, anytime you read in Acts when someone throws down a robe, it's about to get really messy and really violent. All right, so in Acts, it is repeatedly, Paul is running from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, claiming, I'm a Roman citizen, you have to help me, you have to help me. The state protects him, and then they get a wind of what he talks about, and then he's like, no, I'm over here now. And so he's getting snuck out of places because he's a rabble rouser. So anyway, Acts, the book of Acts is a fantastic read. All right, any questions about the questions we're asking ourselves and the questions that we ask other religions to answer? Or other traditions to answer. And I will give you all of these things, so you will have all these questions. I literally am reading from an outline, you'll have them. But anything from the, I got my eye on the time, so anything from, oh, I'm just asking, are there any questions about the questions? It's like one of those, like you look in the mirror, in the mirror, in the mirror, in the mirror. Anyone's questioning the questions? It is a good set of questions, isn't it? It's really fun to have as well. Yeah, Daniel. Yeah, presupposition is a fancier way of saying pre-understanding. Okay, so Daniel asked if the questions, Daniel's question was, could the questions possibly be bringing their own pre-understandings with them? And I would say absolutely. And so that's where the number one posture that we have when we ask the question has to be sort of seated and listening. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then to hear their questions. To hear the questions of the tradition would be another profound level of engaging with other religions. I agree, that's really great. Yeah, okay, so Marty was questioning about the similarity of the different questions. How? Mm-hmm. That would be a pre-understanding. A pre-understanding. So Marty was saying that some of the core concepts would be overlapping and similar, and you're not necessarily wrong, but the foundational work to come to some of those things that look like overlapping would be different. Simultaneously, we get into the tricky, swampy territory that I love swimming in, which is how much of Jesus's rhetoric was taken from pre-existing religions already in the air. And I'm not just talking about Judaism, right? Yeah, you see my little snarky smile, because it's so fun when I have people reading something out of the Buddhist scriptures, and then I get, well, and this is from students, 16-year-olds, kind of nervous. Reverend Larkin, this sounds just like something Jesus would say. And I'm like, oh, really? How do you feel about that? Because some of these things were actually in the air when we talk about that golden rule. We all think Jesus came up with it. Check on the table. Yeah. Yeah, the gospel writers. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right. So Marty's bringing up the reality that our gospel books and letters are actually written by people who are writing to a particular context and group of people. And so when we say Jesus said or really said, it gets into tricky kind of waters, because actually what we're looking at is a letter that was written 80 years outside of Jesus's death and resurrection and ascension, and is written to our particular group of people, which is, if you listen to me closely, I often will drop little tidbits into the sermons to give us context, specifically because we need to know the Gospel of Mark. That's a discipleship book from beginning to end. Everything Mark is talking about is all about what does it look like to be a good disciple in the midst of persecution. And that letter is short, and it is cut off, and it is fervent. Every paragraph in Mark nearly starts with the word kai, and it's translated and then Jesus got in a boat, and then he healed the leper, and then he told his disciples, and then he walked down the road, and then he went to this town, and it's literally, it is so fast. The rhythm of the letter is so fast, but it had to be, because you're writing to a community that is desperately trying to stay alive in the midst of persecution. And Mark is doing one thing: hold the faith. Hold still, little church. You are on the right path. No matter what happens, you are following the Christ. And it kind of makes those letters just way more vivacious to me. Anyway. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. The history does help us to understand that we are dealing with other fellow people just like us. So real quick before I dismiss you, there are some dimensions of religion that we need to be aware of. The kind of brain dimension, the cognitive, deals with the analyzing and systematizing of knowledge. Then there's the ethical dimension of religions. And we go back to the questions and we look at how does this religion inform a social order? That's where we're going to start to pull out those ethical practice ideas and dimensions. There's always a ritual dimension, okay? Nearly every tradition has some form of rituality to it. I don't know if that's a word, but at this hour of night, it is now. All right. And then we have the institutional dimension. Is there a hierarchy going on? Is there an authority in a building somewhere kind of hanging out? Usually there's something. Taoism might be our one non-institutional based tradition, because institution is antithetical to the Tao. So it's going to be harder to locate, but there are sages within Taoism that should help you along your way. There's an aesthetic dimension. So beauty, there's going to be music and artistic practices, and as analytical as Confucius was, the man loved music. And music factors very specifically in the Analects as a moving experience. In fact, he listens to one song that silences him for 3 months, and I'm trying to locate it, because man, would my house be quiet. All 5 of us are talkers. There's also an emotional dimension of religion as well. So connected to our personal identity. We relate to our tradition, not just as a hive of bees, just doing whatever the queen bee wants. Primarily, we individually engage. And so we always have to keep that individual alongside the communal when we're looking at our relationship with our own tradition and then others as well. And then that's it. That's pretty much it. So we have a couple of minutes for questions. Now I put you all on Zoom because I didn't want any tomatoes thrown at me. So if you're gonna throw tomatoes, the mess is on your end. But that's a lot of information for tonight. And again, at the end of the course, I'll send you my whole entire teaching outline. Oh, you want me to do the questions? That's a great idea. So Eric has requested that I send out the questions, the 2 sets of questions that I asked. And I think that's a great idea. Can you text me? You send a message. Daniel's gonna send a message reminding me because I'm not going to do it tonight. How's Zoomland? Zoomtopia?
It's better to be there in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I would love the option in person. One thing I wanted to mention about pre-understanding. There's a person named Peter Rollins who a lot of you might not be aware of. But he has this idea of the reverse evangelism project. Because we often bring ourselves, we have this idea of what we think the world should be like or how we view ourselves. But Peter Rollins challenges us to go up to other groups of people, say as Episcopalians or Christians, so we would go up to against a group of Muslims and say, how do you view us? What does the idea of Christian bring into your mind? When we approach the scene, what does that incite in you? What kind of emotional response does that incite in you? And so there's this reverse evangelism aspect where you're kind of being confronted with how people view yourselves as opposed to how we view ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that that's incredibly powerful. And not only would I challenge people to do that in, say, like interreligious context, but like in personal context. Like there's a very powerful moment when you're like, what do you think of when you think of me?
Yeah. That's really profound. And scripturally, to that, what I was thinking of when John Mark mentioned that was the idea that in the Peter Cornelius episode in Acts 10 with the mystical sheet of meat, unclean meat that descends from the ground, and Peter is confronted with eat it, and he's like, no. But then he goes and he is called to minister to Cornelius, who's a Gentile. And Peter is like beside himself because he's not supposed to be with the Gentiles and he's not supposed to be eating unclean meat. And God is all, don't call unclean what I have called clean. And he is the one who's converted. He is not Cornelius. Peter is converted in Cornelius's living room and then preaches. It's really profound, but that reminded me that reverse evangelism actually reminded me that it's the evangelist who should be first converted. If we're going to do evangelism rightly, it's exactly as John Mark described it through Peter Rollins. Let them tell us what they see.
And that's a very vulnerable place to be, which really opens things up.
You're absolutely right, Cynthia. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
It's an uncomfortable place to be. And I think that I'm a personal aphorism that I have is that there's no growth absent discomfort, right? There's no need to grow absent discomfort. And so when we are confronted with a group of people or even an individual who sees us as they see us, as we present ourselves to them, we often don't get to see that. And so that discomfort is a space to learn and grow as an individual.
Yeah, that's a wonderful word to end on. It is now after 8 and I don't want too many people driving home in the dark. So I thank you so much for joining me for a second week. I am honored to see all your faces and to get the occasional silent chuckle out of Zoom. So if there's nothing else for me, you guys can go ahead and start signing off, or Daniel will do that thing where the meeting starter just ends the meeting and you're like, bah.
Thank you, Lauren.
You guys all have a wonderful